Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us today. Delighted that you have. And as you'll be aware, we're looking at Lockdown 2.0 and how to prepare your lettings business for it. We've been joined by some absolutely brilliant panelists, and we're going to cover off the legal impact and the operational and practical implications as well. For those of you who've been with us before, this will all be well known. For those who haven't, you're in mute mode by default, and that's so that other audience members can hear clearly, but we do want to hear from you. So you will see something very similar to the panel I'm displaying on screen, which is the GoToWebinar panel. We'd love to have your questions, thoughts, feedback and insights. And we've got a dedicated period of this webinar to deal with any questions or thoughts that you have. And this webinar has in large part been driven by the questions that have been asked by Fixflo clients and others across the sector about the impact of Lockdown 2.0. As usual, the disclaimer, so this is not legal advice or official guidance, nor should it be taken as such. But one of our panelists, David Smith, I'm sure would be delighted to assist if you have specific legal questions via his law firm, JMW Solicitors. And our two guests, hopefully well known to you, well known across the sector. So, John, could you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's John Paul. I'm CEO and founder of the Castledene Group, based in the northeast of England.
Brilliant, thank you. And David?
Hello, I'm David Smith. I'm a partner in JMW Solicitors, specialising in residential property law.
Excellent. So we've got what will be, I think we're going to divide this up into legal aspects and practical and operational. And we've got two real experts here to guide us through. Really grateful to you both for joining us. So starting at the very top, the question that has been asked probably more than any others, can high street branches stay open at the moment? And David, what is the legal position?
Yes, is the answer. The regulations are pretty complicated in the way they operate, and actually, oddly enough, they don't say a huge amount about business at all. What they actually talk about a lot is that you have to stay at home. And then there's actually a guy on Twitter who's literally tweeted about every single one of the regs, and he's called these exceptionorama. And the way the regs are written is that they start out by saying you have to stay at home, and then they just go on and on and on for ages about all the different exceptions to staying at home. But without going into all of them, so I'm skipping all the ones on childcare and stuff like that. But one of the key exceptions to leaving home is actually to go to a letting or estate agent, or to go to a property viewing, or to go out and do any actions necessary to let or sell a property. So people are allowed to leave their homes to do property viewings and to go to your offices to look at particulars and to talk to you about putting their property on the market or finding a property. And the stuff on businesses actually doesn't close businesses in the way people think. It closes specific categories of business, particularly restaurants and pubs and hospitality venues. But it is not, and it closes retail premises that aren't selling important goods, essential goods. Although, as we were discussing before this started, there seems to be a variable approach to this among retailers. It does not close service businesses. So letting agent offices can remain open. And then all of this is simply subject to the two key caveats, which is the guidance on house moves remains valid, and the general guidance to business on COVID safety and so on remains valid. They've not been updated, they've not been changed, they still exist.
Brilliant, thank you. That is positive news, and I love the double thumbs up. John, in practice, what does this mean? So how are you operating, and how are you seeing other people operate in a COVID secure way, given that branches are remaining open?
Yeah, so the good news, as David said, is that the choice hasn't been taken out of our hands, where a lot of people are thinking that we would have to close. So you can choose to stay open, but I do appreciate that some agents, especially on the various forums, have decided to shut the branch and work from home, which is their choice. We are following the exact same structure and framework of COVID procedures from last time, just with some enhanced clauses, such as things like it's a closed office, it's by appointment only. You've got to wear masks when people are in the office. We've got perspex screens as we did before. Also, you're not allowed more than 2 people from the same support bubble. So where before you could have 2 people, but they could be, you know, from different support bubbles, now we're being that extra cautious and extra care. Any viewings, any valuations, landlords, tenants, applicants, whoever it may be, have to fill in the questionnaire just to say that they're not, you know, showing any symptoms, etc., etc. So from an operational point of view, it's just a lot more common sense. I appreciate that common sense isn't always common practice, but just be really safe out there and just be seen to be clean. Go that extra mile, because you know, you won't be thanked if somebody catches COVID from an office.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. And I think that through this, it's been really interesting to see how much the government's put into keeping the housing market moving. So whether it's the stamp duty holiday, the express carve-outs for estate and letting agents, we're going to come on to maintenance, but there has been a real desire, I think, to keep this part of the economy moving, possibly for fear of what would happen if it didn't. The next most common question, and this is likely because of where we operate in the market, is can contractors carry out maintenance work in people's homes? David, what's the legal position on that?
Absolutely unchanged from where we were before. So again, guidance on working in people's homes remains valid. If contractors need to attend people's homes for the purposes of work, there is an exception in the regulation to attending someone else's home for the purposes of work or for it to fulfill a legal obligation. And of course, you have a legal obligation to do repairs. So you should, of course, consider triage of non-urgent matters, although increasingly that's started to drop away by the wayside. I think, Raj, you've got some useful stats on all of this anyway. You should, of course, take into account people who are particularly vulnerable or high risk, whether people are shielding, although shielding technically increasingly doesn't exist, or more usually self-isolating because they've been in contact. And obviously you should carry out some degree of diligence to consider whether or not people are showing COVID symptoms, but subject to those sort of general caveats. And then the usual stuff that we've talked about on several occasions before about making sure the property's ventilated, making sure people are wearing masks, making sure that contractors are cleaning their hands before and after, those kind of things. Not going and giving the tenant a hug and having a face-to-face conversation, not sharing cups of tea.
Thank you. And John, what are you doing in practice in respect of maintenance?
Just everything as normal until we hear otherwise. We're still carrying out our legal and compliant obligations. We're still going ahead with repairs. And we're going to talk about this, but one of the things that we have now is we are going to see a little bit of a dip in activity. And so now was the perfect time to get on top of those maintenance issues, those work tickets, and try and build those relationships up with your customer, but also your customer's customer, which is ultimately your tenant.
Yeah, I want to put my neck on the block now. So I'm going to talk through what we saw in terms of lockdown 1 and a prediction, which is always a risky thing to do, about why this time will be different for maintenance. So the 3 key themes that we saw come through the first lockdown, the first national lockdown, was that there was a drop in non-emergency repairs being reported as tenants took a more pragmatic approach to what they needed to be fixed. We saw a material drop in contractor availability, and we saw just a sustained level of emergency repairs. But actually underpinning all of it was a sense that tenants saw that the world was different and their expectations sort of adjusted accordingly. This time, my prediction is that there will be no material drop in repair reporting at all, whether emergency, non-emergency. I think that the leeway that tenants previously provided in terms of service levels and things being dealt with will dissipate. And actually, this is just the operating scenario for life for the foreseeable future. And so I don't care. Things need to be fixed. And I also expect, by analogy to other sectors, we will see an increase in complaints, possibly putting more demand on redress schemes. So I think that the goodwill or the wiggle room that was previously provided by tenants will not bear out to the same extent this time around. And I hope I'm wrong. Next topic is, to what extent do the rules differ across the UK? David, would you like to cover off, I guess, at a high level, any of the key differences? Sorry, David, I think you're muted.
Sorry, I'm not going to talk about Scotland and Northern Ireland because they're really outside my my remit and my field. Wales is different until Monday, because Wales is essentially on its complete circuit break lockdown until Monday, which basically closes everything. The rules after Monday in Wales are currently not 100% certain, but in principle, Wales should be effectively relatively open as of Monday. But I suspect there's going to be a certain amount of interaction back and forth, because I think there are going to be real problems here, because you've got people in Wales who work in England, and England who work in Wales, and there's a sort of crisscross issue. And I suspect Wales is going to try to maintain the position it's been making of keeping its borders to a large extent closed. I mean, they were basically saying that the borders were shut to anyone in a tier 2 and tier 3 lockdown area. I rather suspect Wales is going to take the view that their borders are shut to anyone in England, while England is in what the government refuses to call tier 4 lockdown or tier anything lockdown, but which most people are thinking of as a lockdown. I suspect the Welsh government will probably gen up an announcement over the weekend, if I'm not mistaken.
And so for anybody who works at or close to the border, there may be consequential impacts on staff who have to travel across the border, which is going to be challenging. And we're going to come on to some of the operational points in a moment. Thank you for that. Remote working, what are the biggest challenges that letting agents and property management firms are facing to get going and keep up with remote working? John, what do you see from an operational perspective?
Operational perspective is control. Are they being productive? That's the first thing, because a lot of people, I wouldn't like to guess the percentages, but definitely more than 50% of people do not work as well at home as they do at work with other team members, etc. So that's a consideration. You're going to have to look and see, well, what can we do? Communication is going to be critical and crucial from a management and leadership perspective. Talking with your staff, making sure everything's okay. Is there anything I can do to help? Are you struggling with anything? So those are from an operational point of view, and then from a mental health perspective as well. So I think that is a lot of people, put it one way, 100% of my staff, 100% do not want to go and work from home. Every single person I spoke to said, we even had some people saying, I'll come and work for free. You know, wish I could take them up on that, but unfortunately I'm not allowed to, because they just don't want to work from home. It's different this time. It's completely different. People know what lockdown was like before, and it can be looked at, yes, it's a bit of a jolly for a week, and I can get up and I can go, you know, walk the dog and play with the little in or whatever, but people don't want to be stuck in the house. We need that social interaction, that connection with other people. Our friends, we spend more time with our work colleagues than we do our family. So it's a little bit different from last time. It's not a total lockdown, as David quite rightly said, but we still have to be sort of mindful of operationally and communication-wise, but also from a mental health perspective.
And I think that the mental impact of this, I know from our business that we're doing things to try and help people because we are fully remote, and we can do our jobs from home. But as an employer, I want to make sure that people are okay, and we're trying lots of things, but virtual just isn't the same as in person. It just isn't. David, from an operational perspective, I guess in the legal and compliance point, is there anything that people should be thinking about for lockdown 2?
Well, I think they link together. I mean, I was actually reading the lawyer top 100 report on the 100 biggest law firms in the country, and the introduction actually says that 2020 is the year of mental health, and law firms have historically been a bit odd about it, in that mental health problems are not uncommon among lawyers because they often work under incredible levels of stress. But actually, law firms are often deeply uncaring about the situation. You know, even law firms are being forced to change. And I think, yeah, it is one of the challenges working from home. One of the things that JMW was quite keen to do was to actually get people into the office, not for more senior people like myself, because the reality is more senior people have the luxury of houses that they own with spare rooms and things like that. It was really our junior people we were worried about. Many of them were sitting, working in, you know, especially in London, in relatively small rental properties and sitting on their beds doing their work, which was just not good for them. and they needed to get out and about. And it's unfortunate we've had to pretty much shut down our offices to a large extent again, and we're having to limit them coming in. So I think there is an importance in terms of getting people in. I think the trouble is people tend to think about it in terms of senior people when actually they should be thinking about it in terms of more junior people often, who are often stuck in smaller environments because they have less financial resources. But the other thing that I think is important is to think longer term now. Previously on the first lockdown, there was tended to be an attitude that there was a one-off, and people perhaps were reluctant to put too much investment into new ways of working. I don't think that position is sustainable as we've moved forward. And I'm hoping that people have been investing more in new ways of working. I think people need to really think that this is a long haul thing. I think it's very likely there'll be another lockdown, and this will not be finished until well into next year. You know, it's the spring. We might have a vaccine by the spring, but you've still got to vaccinate a significant percentage of the population. We're certainly running into next summer. And during that period, you'll have probably quite severe local lockdowns. You may well have another national lockdown. So people need to make sure that home working structures are fully embedded across their entire operational field. And of course, inevitably, I'm always going to mention data protection and security, but make sure that the security processes that they might have, you know, paid lip service to the first time because it was only for a month or two, are actually properly embedded, that people have got proper secure ways to work, that they've got proper virtual private networks in place for secure data transfer, that people are using systems that are compatible with data protection rules, so not US-based systems without having thought about data transfer to America. So, you know, if you're doing everything on Gmail and using Google Drive, then you've got a problem because you're putting your stuff in California, and you just can't do that without thinking it through. And the ICO would probably have been a little bit calmer as a one-off last time. The more this goes on, the less slack the Information Commissioner is going to cut to people, and people are now going to have to start really embedding these things and really thinking through the full process and what this actually means. And I suspect we'll come back to this well as a preparing for the future point as well as but we have to accept that lockdown is a long-term scenario, and home working is a long-term scenario.
Thanks, David. Given your view, and I do share the same view, that this is a long haul and constantly swirling set of restrictions that we will face until we eventually emerge into the light again. How can agencies minimise the impact of those changes, typically implemented on relatively short notice, on jobs and deals that they're working on? So how do they stop pipeline bursts, and how do they make sure that they can be calm and agile and support their teams? David, do you have any views on that?
I think you've said this before, and I thought your point was very good. I think over communication is a huge part of the answer. And then I think people need to think very carefully about what their process actually is. I mean, the problem, I think, and John, I think, has alluded to this a couple of times in some of the conversations we were having before these things have started when we were talking yesterday, is that many agents don't fully understand what their process is. I mean, they sort of have a loose idea, but if you actually ask them to break it down to a flow chart, they'd have real trouble. But actually understanding your process properly is the key to the whole thing, because as soon as you understand the process properly, you can see where your bottlenecks are, you can see where your risks are, and you can see the bits that you can easily transfer into home working, the bits that are challenging to transfer into home working, and you can start knocking them off. So the reality is that many estate letting agents are a bit blind to process design issues, and they just sort of think that they'll muddle through with a bit of telephone call and a positive mental attitude. And those get you a long way, but not in the current situation. I think you do need to actually think the process through and do some process design work.
And just before we started, in fact, a minute or so before we press the broadcast button today, our phones pinged with a news flash or breaking news from the BBC on furlough and a possible, although currently unofficial, and that verified extension to the furlough scheme. I'd like to just talk about furlough a little bit more generally. David, do you have any views on how this is going to be enforced, or the view of HMRC, or any potential red flags out there?
Well, I did notice yesterday the HMRC has commenced prosecutions against, I think it's 6 people for breaching the furlough regs last time. I was aware of a lot of people breaching furlough last time by having, particularly in property management, people staying in touch as if it was maternity leave, and the furlough scheme just don't work that way. Obviously, we'll need to see what the Chancellor announces today and what that scheme is going to look like. But I think people have, in some cases, been playing a little bit fast and loose with furlough, and I think it's unrealistic to imagine HMRC aren't going to follow this up. I suspect at some point the HMRC is going to put in some form of returns process and make people do a furlough return, which, especially if we move to some kind of scheme where people can work a certain number of hours, and they'll start following that stuff up. And if people are going to mess around with it, then they're going to have an interaction with HMRC that they won't enjoy.
I'm trying to think of an interaction with HMRC that is enjoyable. John, you are Mr. Operations for the letting sector, for the agency sector. What's your view on this, and how are you approaching it, particularly in terms of dealing with staff against a swirling backdrop of change?
Well, the first thing is we don't want to furlough anybody for the sole reason that we want to keep busy. So, we don't want people sitting at 80% of the wages back at home. It's not great for them, and it's not great for us as a business. From, again, not sound like a broken record from a mental health perspective. So as long as we are, making money and not completely burning cash reserves, we're going to keep everybody on the payroll. We've decided that as a company. There's always going to be something to do, whether it's keeping in touch with your current contacts, your clients or previous contacts, bit of data cleansing, data tidying up, or just people just picking up the phone to people and saying, hi, how are you doing? What can we do to help? Step up your social media as well. So we're going to be stepping up our social media message and making that look positive. But furlough is great if you use it accordingly. But I totally agree with everything David says. If you've been ripping the government off and you think that's fine, then that just shows a lack of character and integrity to me, and you shouldn't be in business. I just think it stinks. I'm not going to hold my tongue on that one. I just think it does, to be fair.
And we've talked around this a little bit, so I'm going to ask a sort of direct question. So remote working was originally viewed as a temporary measure. We've talked about motivation and mental health. John, how do you keep up on this morale and motivate your team, and what are you planning on doing over the next, say, 9 months if we're going to go through phases of lock and unlock?
Lots of gin. No, I'm joking. So if you look at it, this is where I'm going to get my geek on. If you look at motivational behaviour in theory, etc., and you look at how you motivate people, Maslow hierarchy of needs, Alder, Hertzberg, McClellan, they all talk about progressing, effectively achievement, attainment, ambition. So it's moving towards a set of goals. So what we're going to be doing is interacting with our staff and give them little mini wins, little mini targets, little mini goals to go through if they are going to be put on furlough. So we'll have short, medium and long-term goals. Short in this aspect would possibly be daily. Medium could be weekly. Long-term could be on a monthly basis, or however long, quarterly, or however long this is gonna last. In pre-COVID world, short was weekly, medium was monthly, long-term was a year plus. So it's just about what can we do to make it a little bit of competitiveness, a little bit of pushing them. Once you achieve it, high fives, pats on the backs, well done, little Zoom conferences and Zoom calls, and just a little bit of appreciation in front of the peers and the colleagues. Communication, over-communicate. You just cannot over-communicate in this situation. You cannot do that. So we're just going to be talking to our guys on a daily basis. We've even put in, gin was a joke, but it's also true. We are going to have a gin evening one Friday night. So we're going to get those little vials and ping them off to all parts of the northeast of England where our staff are, and just try and keep people engaged. And together we are tribal people, I suppose, and the majority. I'm not talking about the outliers, they're like the 5% here and the 5% there. The main 95% of people enjoy each other's company. We enjoy going to work, and you've got to try and do what you can to make it feel as though it's business and communication and social interaction as best you can.
Amazing. And David, do you have anything to add to that in terms of the long-termism versus short-termism that I think people are pivoting towards?
Well, I take the points they made, but I tend towards the view that good people management is good people management in all circumstances. Obviously, you have to do it a bit differently now, but you should be communicating with your staff and finding ways to reward them and move them forward anyway. So I think it's just about finding ways to adapt that to our new reality, and John set out lots of good ones. I expect the reality is that you have to pick what works for different people, but I think that I'd still come back to we had something really rather silly where we said that everyone had to talk to their staff and just have a check that they were okay thing. But lawyers, you have to really spoon feed lawyers in staff care stuff. So but it helps. Lawyers tend to be much less requiring of this kind of stuff because it's the nature of the people who go into the game. They're much more solo flyers, but we all need something sometimes, and it's important to make sure that people are getting what they need, and that you make sure that the communication channel is open, however complicated that becomes.
Amazing. Just as a reminder, we would love to have your questions, thoughts and insights to put to the panel. We've got time at the end of the webinar. Typically, we have pages of questions, and thus far there are fewer, which I think indicates that either people fully understand what we've said so far, or they're already implementing everything. But if there is, we've got a range from EICRs, furlough, inspections, but if there's anything that you would like to know or to pose to the panel, please do put it into the chat box on the right-hand side. So the market... The market is weird, it is strange, it's wonderful, and it's majestic. The level of activity, so we had a period after the end of the first lockdown where, from most of our clients' perspective, not all of them, it was some of the busiest times they've had in recent memory. John, I think the initial expectation was that there would be an immediate slowdown in activity, but anecdotally that doesn't seem to have come through. I'd love to hear what you're seeing on the front line, but also at some stage, Christmas is typically a quieter period anyway. What should people be doing during that sort of hopefully brief hiatus in activity to prepare their business for next year?
So a couple of our branches are quite quiet, but the vast majority, like 80%, it's just business as normal, and it's very comparable to this time last year in terms of sales. So thankfully, we're not seeing a huge dip. I'm not naive enough to think that's not going to happen. Of course it is, because regardless of we're allowed to open, the public are going to feel a little bit apprehensive, want to stop in. As you quite rightly said, coming up Christmas, it's normally a little bit quieter. That gives us time to prospect more, put a house in order, data cleansing, look at new ways to market and advertise. But the big one for us is going to be social media. So people are going to be not going out as much because there's not a lot of restaurants, bars, pubs, clubs, they're all shut. So a lot more time spent on the phone, spent on the computer. Social media, digital media, Facebook, get your message out there. And don't try and sell. Just offer really good, helpful advice. This is what we're doing to help people. We're doing things like we're going to be interviewing other business owners, nothing to do with property, and we're going to be sharing their story on our page, and then we're going to be sharing it to their business to our fans. A bit of reciprocity, tag them in it, so now all of a sudden we're known to their fans and get more likes, etc. on our business page. So it's just a bit of a time, and again, it's different up in the northeast, and it's different at different pockets of the UK because we're very community driven. I imagine in certain city centres and possibly London, they don't care. You probably don't even know who your neighbour is. So in certain parts of where we are, it's a blessing and a curse because unfortunately everybody knows your bloody business. So it's just being community driven, interview people, help people. We're stepping up our food bank causes. and we're doing a lot more like Halloween, you know, that sort of stuff. We've done that, and just building up to Christmas. Just be seen, just pump out the content, pump out the valuable information, and you will be the first person. The majority of agents aren't going to do that. So if there's 20 agents on your road and there's only 1 or 2 of you pumping out this content, this information, come the new year when they're ready to put the property on the market, who they're going to go to? You and your fellow one agent who's been posting every day, twice a day, or Joe Blogs who they've not heard from for 8 or 9 weeks. It's going to be you all day long. So just get that content out there on your social media channels.
But a very positive message, David. I know that there are some, what I describe as challenges for the letting sector over coming months. Would you like to just talk through the stuff around evictions and the like?
Well, I mean, we've still got the new rules and the longer notice periods till next March. There's an ongoing interaction around actual enforceability of possession orders, because it's transpired that basically bailiffs and high court enforcement officers have been told not to enforce in tier 2 and tier 3 lockdown areas, it looks as though that's going to be rolled out for the whole country effectively during the next month. And of course, by the time we come out of that, then we're only less than 10 days away on the 2nd of December from the 11th of December Christmas truce, as they're calling it, in a sort of World War I type illusion. I can't say any more about that, but all I can say is read the Sunday Times on Sunday, and there may be a story appearing about further interaction on that. So people need to, obviously, I think the thing to bear in mind is that you need to find other ways of dealing with tenants. That's the simple reality. Obviously, there are many tenants are still paying the rent, so things are not a disaster zone. There are groups of tenants who are having difficulty. You need to work with them. There are groups of tenants who are playing games. You need to deal with them. Dealing with them by eviction is not likely to be effective, but there are other options, including, for example, seeking money judgments against them for the money. There are a load of mediation services sprung up off the back of most of the deposit and redress schemes. There may be a resolution there. And again, I think it's about good communication. It's notable that the majority of complaints to the Property Ombudsman by both landlords and tenants relate to communication. And communicating well with tenants is just as important as communicating well with your clients. So communicate with your client's client, as I think it was John described them earlier. And that's the best that we can achieve at the moment. I think people also need to recognise that this is the start of something that was coming anyway. We knew that Section 21 was going to be got rid of next year. We are seeing to some extent a foretaste of a new, more complex and more nuanced lettings market, where tenants potentially are able to stay on property for longer periods of time. It becomes more complex to evict them, and where alternative resolutions need to be considered.
Yes, and our next webinar, I'm just going to do a cheeky plug for it, is on mediation, everything you need to know, which by Mike Morgan and Sean Hooker from Hamilton Fraser Property Redress Scheme, talking through what mediation is, why letting agents may want to consider it as a recommendation to their clients, how it differs from the current mechanisms for dispute resolution, and some case studies. So if that is of interest to you, you'll receive details at the end of this webinar. Thank you for the lovely segue. We're going to move on to the audience questions, and the one that I think has got to the top of the list because it's been asked by 5 people in different guises. I'm hopefully going to get this in the right way to cover the various ways in which it's been asked, is can we carry out inspections? David?
Yes. I mean, subject to the guidance and taking into account, you know, that they have to be done with care and sensitivity, ventilation, blah, blah, blah. And obviously checking that the person is not self-isolating or otherwise vulnerable first. So yes, you can. And this is, but I think this is where the problem is going to lie, in that, Raj, you were rightly saying earlier that many tenants are no longer interested in COVID-related excuses for not doing their relatively minor repairs even, I suspect that they'll be more likely to use a COVID-related point when they don't want you to turn up to the property and inspect it. So there is this great problem at the moment, which I've seen in a number of contexts, that people will use coronavirus when it suits them to do so. So that will need to be considered, but people will need to be relatively polite but firm about these things. I don't think that saying we're turning up in 24 hours, we'll use our own keys unless you tell us otherwise, particularly productive way forward, particularly when everyone's at home. So a change to the standard sort of communication people might tend to use around these is probably required, but there is no particular reason why you can't do an inspection. But I would make sure my letter was majoring on the COVID-safe way I will be doing it, in the same way that most of the letters you see around property viewings say rather less about the viewing and rather more about the amount of safety that will be in place to make sure the viewing is a COVID-safe experience. So COVID-safe inspections.
Thank you. And John, so if we take the pre-COVID frequency or method of inspections and your current operational practice, what are the key differences you've brought about?
Just back in what David said, it's all around that health and safety. It's all around COVID secure. So we send out prospecting letters. This week has been very, very little about give us your business. It's been, I hope you're okay. I hope everything's okay. We're here if you need us. We'll come out, we've got 3D viewings and virtual tours and all that sort of stuff, but we hope you're all right. So just change your not necessarily your method of communication, but the message that's going out there, and just genuinely care about people. If you think you're going through it tough, you're not the only one. Everybody is. And yes, it might not be as bad as the first lockdown, but us three here might be quite mentally tough, and we might be fine, and it mightn't be a problem for us. But our tenants could be going through a lot worse. We don't know what other people are experiencing. We haven't walked in their shoes. So just walk on eggshells, kid gloves, that type of thing. Again, I quite like David's point where you can work with some people, tenants, but then you've just got to deal with another sort of people. I'm going to pinch that one. I like that saying, David. So sometimes you just have to deal with what you've got to deal with, and that's when you can try and do the eviction process, and you can try and get onto the guarantors, etc., etc. But if they can't, there's a difference between a can't pay and a won't pay, is what I'm saying. There's a difference between I can't let you in to do an inspection, or I'm just being a swine and I won't let you in. So just try and have a bit of empathy, a bit of emotional intelligence, understand the difference, and just direct your message accordingly.
Yeah, I think the answer when he says you can't do an inspection is not why not, but what are your concerns and what is the problem and how can we resolve it? And that might then move on. Once their concerns prove to be baseless or silly, you might then move on, possibly fairly swiftly, to why not. But I think just finding the right way to approach these things is key.
That's a really good point, actually. Just ask better questions. What would have to happen to make you feel more secure about us coming out and doing an individual inspection? Put it back onto them. What do you think? How do you feel? What can we do to help you? And just get them to give you the answer. Fine, not a problem. We'll wash our hands in front of you, we'll wear our masks, wear a visor, whatever it is. But just ask better questions.
And also emphasising the importance that inspection isn't just there for the landlord's benefit. It is there to make sure the property is in good condition, which ultimately is there to protect the tenant as well. It's not just there to make sure they're not smoking cigarettes in the back garden.
My call to arms to the audience to pose questions to the panel seems to have worked. So we're now up to 2 pages of questions. So I'm now furiously filtering my way through them. The next theme is around EICRs. It's been asked in a few different ways, but the crux of it is, has anything changed in respect of EICRs? Will the government change the timeframes? Have the requirements been relaxed in light of the difficulty in sourcing appropriate contractors?
No, and still no. I have, for a group of clients, been writing letters regularly to the government on this, and the civil servant involved has now reduced himself to just ignoring me completely. It's not going to be dropped, though. If I'm going to be completely honest with you, I'll tell you what will happen. It will go on and on and on and on and on until next April. and approximately 3 days before you're required to have all your inspections done, the government will suddenly give you an extra 2 months. If anything's going to happen, it will be that, which I appreciate is entirely not the answer anyone wants to hear, but that is the reality. I think the government probably will do something about it eventually, but by the time they do it, it'll probably be too late.
And so that means that people ought to be getting them done in advance of that, because they can't hang their hat on the fact that there may be an extension. John, what are you doing in practice for EICRs across your portfolio?
We're just getting them done as and when needed. So we're not waiting. We're again, communication all boils down to that. So we've got, a lovely little explanation sheet for our landlords explaining it's a regulatory and compliance need. If you want us to continue managing your house, this needs to be done. So, and just preparation in advance as well. So even if it's 2 or 3 months off, try and get them done now with the explanation of, look, if we do this last minute, the contractor can charge you extra and there's nothing you can do about it. So let's get it done with a little bit of foresight and forethought, get it done so we're not worrying. It's not like how I used to, learn from my exams back in the day, last minute cramming, and I forgot it 2 days after. Let's get it done with plenty of time and just keep everybody safe for the sake of a couple £100, depending on the size of the property. Let's not mess around.
The problem here is that people are trying to do what they tend to do with gas safety and leave it to the last minute to get the maximum amount of time. But it's 5 years, not 12 months. And the reason that the regulations allow till next April is not so that everyone can put their feet up until March. They allow till next April because the government was aware that there would be difficulties with electrical contractors, perhaps not the level of difficulty that now is, but that there would be difficulties and that it would take time. So it's not going to be productive for me to go back to a government, a civil servant in March and say, oh, well, no one did anything. And we didn't tell you no one would do anything. So we need more time, because they'll just say, well, it's your own problem, isn't it? The fact is, and I've said this previously already, people should be doing these if they can. If they've got vacant properties, get them done now. Don't wait, because you may not be able to get the contractor when you want them. And you'll be sitting there with a tenant wanting to move in. You'll have finally got a tenant. You'll be delighted. And then you can't move them in because you haven't got your EICR. Or you can move them in at risk because you haven't got the EICR. If you can get access and you've got a contractor available and the tenant will let you in to do the check, get it done. That is what the purpose of the regulations is.
Because we heard from clients that they were struggling to source contractors or to get enough depth of contractors, I think it's next week, we're launching 2 national networks of EICR specialists via Fixflo, so they'll be available within the platform to all clients with an SLA and agreed schedule of rates. We estimate that our clients need a lot done across their portfolio, so probably close to 600,000 still to be done through the Fixflo platform. But these national networks believe that they will be able to provide the supply if people want them, so they'll be available. I think it's the middle of next week within Fixflo. Specific question for David is around notice periods. So is the notice period for a Section 8 where the landlord's died, with or without a will, still 6 months notice?
Sorry, where the landlord has died?
I think
there is no Section 8 notice where a landlord died. They're just dead. It's not around to the tenant. I presume you mean when the tenant died.
Yes.
Still 6 months. Oh my God! Off the top of my head, I have absolutely no idea.
We will
ask another question.
John, do you have effective socially distanced workspaces for people in the office? So I think the person asking this has a relatively small space and is struggling with how to actually create a socially distanced workspace. So while David looks up the point of law, what are you doing in your various offices?
Well, for starters, David, just give me the nod when you're done and I'll just keep talking. I'll filibuster all afternoon if you want. So what we're quite lucky in the fact that we've always got oversized offices and branches for us, because we're all about the growth and scalability. However, I do know a couple of my clients have got smaller branches, And I quite like this idea. They're doing an A and a B team. So 1 week, person A or see they've got a 4-person branch or a 5-person branch, but it's only big enough really for 2 to 3 people socially distanced and effectively. So they will put people in different pods. So pod 1 will work all of this week, and the other pod will work at home, and then they'll just do a flip next week. And therefore, you don't need 5 laptops, you just need 2 or 3. You don't need 5 phones, VoIP phones, you just need 2 or whatever. Right, I'm done now. That's what we're doing. So yeah, it's the A and B team. I quite like that. So just yeah, some people work from home, some people work in the office, and then just flip it. So a week's not that bad to be working at home and then have to come to work. That's the worst case scenario. Best case is your office is big enough and you move things around and put things at the back or storage or whatever. If you can't do that, A and B team.
Thank you. And David, was the thumbs up that it is the same, or that you have the answer?
I have the answer. So if you're talking about tenant death, that's ground 7. That is 3 months under the current rules.
Thank you. And
Wales is 6 months.
my colleague Remy has just highlighted that we, in fact, have produced a guide with you, David, on the different grounds.
I agree.
And so it's available from the Fixflo website under ebooks with a step-by-step, ground-by-ground explanation of the notice periods. So sorry for forgetting about that, Remy. The next question is directed to John, which is, do you provide your staff with mobile phones to take videos and send them to potential viewers? And David, should people handle video viewings in a different way? I'm assuming that may be to do with GDPR, but perhaps another aspect as well. So John, are you providing people with mobile phones for video viewings, and how are you dealing with that?
No, so cameras. So if you've got a half decent camera, like a Canon camera, it'll have the video capacity. So you don't need mobile phones. We've also got a 3D. It's called the Matterport. So that's very good for the 3D tours as well. So the guys have all got the equipment, so that we don't have to ask them to use their mobiles. It's all equipment that we provide as part of the part of the works equipment.
David, anything? I'm assuming that the second part of the question being directed to you was around GDPR or data protection or something akin to that. Do you have anything to add in terms of video viewings?
In terms of video viewings, what I would say is TPO and ARLA got assured advice. There are 2 elements to this, really. I mean, there's obviously the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading's regulations aspect to it, and the thing to bear in mind there is that it's no different from any other property advertising. It must not be misleading. What you need to bear in mind with a video viewing, of course, is unlike an in-person viewing where the person can actually choose where they go and open up cupboards and things like that. Obviously, a video viewing doesn't allow that, so you must make sure that your video viewing, as far as possible, gives a relatively warts and all picture of the property, and you don't carefully stand with your back to the stain on the wall where the damp's coming through at all times. So I would suggest in that basis, going into every room and doing a straight 360 before perhaps zooming in on specific features, or an overview shot of each room before zooming on specific features, so there's a general ability. Or alternatively, you could do live video viewings, so they can say go left a bit, go right a bit. Data protection, it's no different from any other viewing. I mean, if you do a video viewing, clearly you shouldn't be zooming in on people's checkbooks. Sorry, it's a bit out of date. Sorry, people's bank cards. Checkbooks don't even exist, really, do they? But provided you're not revealing people's personal information, it is not a GDPR aspect to do a video viewing that happens to show that people have some personal possessions in their home. I have cushions.
You do, and they are lovely. The next question is more, I'll describe it as more fact specific than I'd usually pose to you, David, but it's come up from 2 people. So perhaps it's indicative of a behavioural change. In both cases, they have served notice on the tenant for antisocial behaviour, and the tenant, in retaliation, response, depending on your view of the world, has now stopped paying rent. They would like to know what they can or should do.
this is not new. I mean, it's always been the case that when you serve notice on tenants, they frequently stop paying rent, if for no other reason, to have them to build themselves up a financial cushion so they've got money for the next property. I mean, obviously, I don't know what notice they've served. If they've used antisocial behaviour and they've used ground 14, then the notice period is 0, so they should be issuing proceedings in the county court ASAP, and they can claim for the rent arrears alongside the as part of the proceedings anyway, regardless of whether they've served notice citing rent arrears, or they can start alternative debt proceedings. Other than that, those are the options, I'm afraid. Get legal advice.
And David's details will be sent out in the email that follows up from this. And so I'm going to bring us back. So we've sort of gone across quite a few different topics today, but today is the first day of National Lockdown 2.0. So what are the key things that you would be doing today if you haven't already done them? So John, what would you be doing? I know you're Mr. Prepared, but what would you be doing?
Well, make sure your staff are okay. They understand what's expected of them. They understand that there's a support mechanism there to help them. Communicate, over-communicate. And during this time of lockdown 2.0, I like that. Make sure that when you've got a bit of downtime, make sure you over-communicate to all your customers and your clients. Just come out of this looking good. Come out of this looking very helpful. A lot of empathy, trying to help people. You know, and you'll do well, you know, next year when this is about to hopefully ramp up, and hopefully we don't go into further lockdowns. But I do tend to agree with you two guys. I think we're in this for the foreseeable. So when the housing market does come back to normal, make sure you're the agent of choice.
Brilliant, thank you, David. What would you do?
Well, obviously, out of camera shot, you can't see my huge pile of dried pasta and toilet roll. It's not that, I'm joking. I think the thing I'm thinking is, and obviously John kind of alluded to it already, is that this may be 2.0, but you should be aware of a 2.5 and a 3. And I think what people need to think about, and people are not doing this nationally, because you can see it even by people's approach to and the vox pops and people's attitude to a second lockdown, is that we were told there would be second and third lockdowns. We need to bear in mind this is a long process. It takes time. I think there will be more lockdowns, and people need to really make sure that they're not treating this as another quick 1 month. It will not all be over by Christmas.
I've got a couple of points. I'm speaking directly to the business owners or leaders that are in the audience today. There are 2 things I would strongly advocate you do. The first is, don't assume that the level or types of government support that were publicised previously have stayed the same. So rules around civils, bounce back loans and furlough, just as 3 examples, are changing and have changed. So please make sure you know what the current situation is and you are taking the appropriate support for your business. Obviously not doing what John referred to before, which is sort of defrauding the state. But if there is support there that you qualify for and need, please make sure you're aware of what the current rules are. And the second is, through this webinar series, we've talked quite a lot about the need to mentally support your team, your staff, create motivation and mental security. Please don't forget your own mental health as well, and physical health. And it's great to look after yourself, but make sure as business owners you're taking care of yourselves, because we're in this, I think, for the long haul, and you'll need to be strong as we come out of this. And with that, I'd just like to thank you all very much for attending Lockdown 2.0, what it means. I think sort of summarised neatly by David's smile, thumbs up, and the word yes at the start. Really grateful to John for providing frontline and operational expertise and insights. If you have any feedback, please let us know by email to research@fixflo.com. As I mentioned earlier, our next webinar is about mediation, and we're seeing that this is going to become more important, not least because of the absence of remedy through the court, or the increased difficulties of remedy through the court. So if you're interested, you don't know about mediation, or you'd like to know more, I strongly encourage you to attend. Follow-up materials and a recording will be sent out to you, and please do let us know your feedback. Hope everyone stays well, healthy and safe during Lockdown 2.0, and thank you very much for joining us. Goodbye.